Hey there, wake up. It's Means Morning News. Just after 11 a.m. on the East Coast, I'm Sam Sachs. One more episode before I sublimate into the weekend. And we begin in Washington, D.C., where conservative lawmakers are trying to criminalize left-wing protests ahead of a major nationwide demonstration against the president. Over 2,500 No Kings protests are planned from coast to coast on Saturday. It could be the largest single day of protest in U.S. history, with more and more people motivated to the streets by Trump's recent authoritarian actions. There were similar No Kings protests held back in June. A coalition of left and liberal groups are behind the demonstrations, including well-established, well-known entities like the ACLU, the American Federation of Teachers, and the League of Conservation Voters. This is an event where there will probably be families and kids, as well as some more radically minded people hoping to talk to the masses and pull them left. It's all mostly harmless stuff. But here's how the right is reacting to it.
I encourage you to watch. We call it the Hate America rally that'll happen Saturday. Let's see who shows up for that. I bet you see pro-Hamas supporters. I bet you see Antifa types. I bet you see the Marxists in full display, the people who don't want to stand and defend the foundational truths of this republic.
And then October 18th is when the protest gets here. This will be a Soros paid-for protest where his professional protesters show up, the agitators show up. We'll have to get the National Guard out. Hopefully it'll be peaceful. I doubt it.
You look at this No Kings rally, and there's considerable evidence that George Soros and his network is behind funding these rallies, which may well be riots all across the country. And Soros is writing the check. And so I've introduced legislation called the Stop Funders Act that would add rioting to the list of predicate offenses for RICO. Why is that? Because it would let the Department of Justice use RICO, racketeering, to prosecute the money that is funding the anti-Semitic protests on campuses, the pro-open border protest in L.A. and other cities, and these No King protests.
Yeah, that's Ted Cruz calling for RICO charges to be brought against the ACLU and the hundreds of other groups helping to organize the No Kings protests. But the White House isn't waiting for an act of Congress to disrupt its political opponents. President Trump ordered an overhaul at the Internal Revenue Service to transform it into another arm of his political retribution machine. The plan involves installing allies at the top of the IRS investigative unit in order to more easily pursue left-leaning groups in politically motivated probes, to dismantle them, or at least strip them of their tax-exempt status. The Journal reported that a senior IRS official involved in the effort has drawn up a list of potential targets that includes major Democratic donors. This is all in conjunction with an effort to disrupt left and liberal groups through federal law enforcement's joint terrorism task forces. This was never about Antifa. It's always been about eliminating all opposition to right-wing authoritarianism. Anyway, don't let them scare you. If you're able to, show up at one of the No Kings protests this weekend and see how many liberal wine moms you can radicalize. Now to the U.S. Supreme Court, where conservative lawyers argued that Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act is itself racist and unconstitutional. Yeah, these people have no shame. Let's discuss for a moment how we got here. Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act prohibits election-related discrimination based on race. It protects minority groups from any voting procedures that result in diminishing their ability to participate in the democratic process, and that includes congressional maps gerrymandered in a way to dilute minority representation, which is exactly what happened in Louisiana. In 2022, Republicans in the state drew lines so that only one of the 6 congressional districts had minority-majority representation, despite 1/3 of Louisiana's population being black. A group of voters sued, arguing that the map violated Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. 2 different courts found that the maps were indeed likely illegal and ordered the state to draw new maps that more accurately represented the racial demographics of the state. The new map that was adopted added a second black majority district. Now, since the Voting Rights Act was enshrined into law, this process has played out again and again, just like this. White conservative state legislatures in the South try to suppress black voters with gerrymandered maps. Civil rights groups sue under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. And courts rectify the situation in the cases where it's proven. And that often results in new maps with more minority representation. In this case before the court, conservative lawyers representing Louisiana and a group of non-African American voters in the state are claiming that the remedy to racist gerrymandering is itself racist and thus unconstitutional. As in, it's not racist to suppress the black vote with gerrymandered maps. It's racist to protect the black vote with new maps. That's the depth of the argument here. They also claim that Section 2 should not apply unless there's evidence of a specific intent to discriminate based on race. Like an audio recording of guys saying, hey, let's draw new districts to screw black people. Absent that evidence of intent, it should just be assumed that maps are being drawn for partisan reasons or to protect incumbents, the conservatives say, all of which is not prohibited under the Constitution. But that is never how Section 2 has been applied in history. Intent has never been a requirement. Instead, the consideration has always been, what is the effect of the congressional map? Even if maps are being drawn to suppress Democrats, not black voters, if the effect is that the black vote is sufficiently diluted, then it violates Section 2. The conservative justices appeared open to using this case to lop off another chunk of the Voting Rights Act. Justice Brett Kavanaugh questioned if Section 2 is even necessary anymore and strongly suggested that it should be wound down. Quote, this court's cases in a variety of contexts have said that race-based remedies are permissible for a period of time, sometimes for a long period of time, decades in some cases. But they should not be indefinite and should have an end point. Kavanaugh is wrong for a number of reasons. First, if Congress wanted Section 2 to end one day, it would have put an expiration date on it, as it did with other provisions in the Voting Rights Act. And second, Section 2 is not itself a race-based remedy. It's, as Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson argued, just a tool that doesn't do any active work until it's used to analyze whether discrimination is taking place. And only afterward do courts and relevant parties determine remedies, which at times can be race-based. But Kavanaugh and the conservative position can be summed up as, we've solved racism in 2025 America, so we no longer need laws like Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act to protect people from institutional racism. Now, even if that was true, that we solved racism, it's in part thanks to the Voting Rights Act. So getting rid of the law would be like ditching your umbrella because it's done such a good job of keeping you dry. That'd be a stupid thing to do, especially when there's some big fucking cumulonimbus clouds on the horizon. I think we all know the very dark place that Trump, or more accurately, Stephen Miller, is trying to drag this country to. I mean, Trump is afraid to even say it out loud.
I want to thank Stephen Miller, who's right back in the audience right there. I'd love to have him. I love watching him on television. I'd love to have him come up and explain his true feelings, but maybe not his truest feelings. That might be going a little bit too far.
Yeah, it's funny because he's probably talking about Stephen liking Hitler. In what's likely another product of Mr. Miller's skull, the Trump administration is planning to overhaul refugee resettlement programs to give preferential treatment to white people. This is from the New York Times. Quote, the proposed changes would put new emphasis on whether applicants would be able to assimilate into the United States, directing them to take classes on American history and values in respect for cultural norms. The proposals also advise Mr. Trump to prioritize Europeans who have been targeted for peaceful expression of views online, such as opposition to mass migration or support for populist political parties. Times noted that that's likely a reference to the German neo-Nazi AfD party, which has received support from Vice President J.D. Vance and the president's former buddy, Elon Musk. And that the White House was reviewing who in Europe would be eligible for resettlement. So no, maybe it's not a good idea to get rid of the Voting Rights Act at a time when the president is trying to import German neo-Nazis into the country. At least they knew a little bit about rocket science the first time. Fuck. Now to Alaska, where remote villages along the Bering Sea are trying to recover from a destructive typhoon and severe flooding. Tens of thousands of people live in the remote region affected by the storms. Most are indigenous. The area has long been neglected and lacks state and federal investment in critical infrastructure, making rescue operations and rebuilding more difficult. One of the native villages affected is Kipnuk, where flooding destroyed homes and people were still being rescued as recently as this week. Several months before the flooding, though, the town was set to begin work to stabilize its riverbanks, which are rapidly eroding as the permafrost on which Kipnuk is built dissolves away due to global warming. The town was awarded a $20 million grant from the EPA as part of a broader $3 billion initiative to make communities more resilient from climate-related disasters. But construction never started in Kipnuk because the village never got the money, because Trump's EPA administrator Lee Zeldin canceled the grant, claiming it was an example of the wasteful DEI that the president has ordered to be rooted out of the government. The village tried to get the funding back. It joined a lawsuit along with other tribes, nonprofits, and local governments that alleged Zeldin broke the law when he unilaterally canceled the environmental justice grants, which had already been approved and funded by Congress. Those legal efforts were hindered by the Supreme Court, which has made it more difficult to sue the administration over illegally terminated grants. And so the river stabilization project was never started. And then last week, Typhoon Halong hit, and the floodwaters overwhelmed the river banks in Kipnuk, and at least one person died. 2 are still missing. $20 million means absolutely nothing to the federal government. It's a rounding error at the Pentagon. But to Kipnuk, it's life or death. Without the federal funding, Kipnuk doesn't have the resources to stabilize its riverbanks. The average annual income in the village is about $12,000, and it has a poverty rate of more than 26%. Pretty much the most vulnerable people in the country cast aside so that the EPA administrator can claim he fulfilled the president's war on woke. What the hell is going on here? Before we crash into the weekend, just a reminder that billionaires are a product of mental illness and policy failures, and their existence is evidence of a deeply flawed society. Now that that is out of the way, this week's Rich Dick is Mark Benioff. The Salesforce CEO is the latest American oligarch to endorse a Trumpian police state. In an interview with the New York Times, Benioff took a hatchet to his own carefully cultivated image of a benevolent or even progressive billionaire. He even shocked his own publicist, who, according to the Times, was left stunned with her mouth open after the interview. Benioff, who also owns Time magazine, told the paper he would support the president deploying National Guard troops to San Francisco, as Trump has threatened to do repeatedly. The White House already sent troops to Los Angeles and attempted to deploy the Guard to Chicago and Portland, but are currently restrained by court order, which found the deployments to be illegal. Benioff said that Guard soldiers could help reduce crime in San Francisco. Quote, "We don't have enough cops, so if they can be cops, I'm all for it." Someone tell this bozo that there are laws in the United States against using the military as police, because it's the sort of thing that quickly leads to tyranny. Tyranny is, of course, exactly what the billionaire class desires. It's like when Oracle CEO Larry Ellison called for AI-powered surveillance cameras to be installed everywhere to ensure that everyone is on their best behavior. Benioff claimed that San Francisco defunded its police and that it needed to hire 1,000 new cops. He posted on Twitter this week a misleading chart that makes it look like hiring for the San Francisco Police Department fell off a cliff in recent years. But if you look at the range on the y-axis of the chart, you notice it starts at 1,500 and goes to 1,800. So what looks like a large drop-off is actually just a reduction in about 300 officers from its peak in 2019. San Francisco never defunded the police, and crime in the city is near historic lows. But during a Salesforce conference this week in San Francisco, Benioff interviewed the executive of a robot company and urged him to sell his products to the police department and the Pentagon. Benioff said San Francisco could bolster their police forces with 500 to 1,000 AI-powered robots patrolling the city. Benioff's comments made even the CEO of that robot company, Brett Adcock, uncomfortable. He said he doesn't want his humanoid bots in the business of harming other people. Benioff is also hoping to profit off Trump's illegal, marauding mass deportation program. He pitched ICE on Salesforce's cloud computing and AI capabilities to assist in rounding people up. Salesforce also contracted with ICE during the Obama administration. It's easy for billionaires to get behind a police state because they know it won't affect their civil liberties. They've already largely removed themselves from the society the rest of us have to live in. They don't take the same types of transportation or eat at the same restaurants or live in the same neighborhoods as us. Shit, Benioff doesn't even live in San Francisco, the city he's calling to be put under control of the military. Like a lot of other tech billionaires, he spends most of his time living out in Hawaii, where he's also mysteriously buying up huge tracts of land, sometimes well above market price, to do something. Locals aren't sure what his plans are, but they're worried. When an NPR reporter tried digging into Benioff's Hawaiian land purchases, she was threatened by him. This is from NPR. Quote, "He called me and demanded to know the title of the piece. During that call, he also mentioned he knew the exact area where I was staying. Unnerved, I asked how he knew, and he said, 'It's my job. You have a job and I have a job.' During the interview, he brings up more personal details about me and my family." Okay, yeah, he's definitely up to something sketchy in Hawaii. Benioff's support for a military police state, just like Ellison's call for a panopticon surveillance system, all comes from the same place. What's happening here is the ruling class realizes it's pushed too far, that inequality is breaking society, and that they need to ally with state security forces to prepare for the backlash. The road to fascism is paved by billionaires like Mark Benioff. This week's Rich Dick. All right, friends, the show ends today with a sunrise from the Gulf of Mexico. It was sent in by Stepdad. Not my stepdad, just Stepdad. Enjoy. Thank you, Stepdad. No relation to teenage stepdad. That's the show. Thanks for watching, and thanks to the team behind the scenes. Find more MMN at means.tv. We also have YouTube and podcast channels, and you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky. One day capitalism will fall. Until then, we're going to be right here. See you next week.